Welcome to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm Riane Eisler, President of the Center for Partnership Systems. This podcast brings you voices from the partnership movement, people using partnership practices to build a world that values caring, nature, and shared prosperity. The Power of Partnership podcast is hosted by Sherry Jacobs-Pruitt, a health policy and partnership scholar. Today, Sherry interviews Heidi Sieck, co-founder of the Vote pro-choice organization, on how we can use partnership-based principles to build a world with reproductive freedom for all. And now, on to today's POP podcast.
Welcome, Heidi, to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm so excited and honored to have you on our show today. So you're founder and board president of Vote Pro-Choice. You're a political consultant and fundraiser for San Francisco Mayor London Breed, and you're the campaign director for the San Francisco Reproductive Freedom Ballot Initiative. I'm really excited to begin this discussion and learn more today about your work specific to reproductive rights.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
So let's start by you sharing with our listeners how you first learned about Riane Eisler's partnership domination paradigm and her caring economy framework.
Well, I really appreciate this conversation because I originally started working in politics and reproductive rights in the early 90s in Nebraska. My grandfather was an elected state senator, and it was during the time when the infrastructure of the Republican Party was starting to be developed and with the intention of chipping away at abortion rights in the country. So I was seeing it firsthand in the state legislature at the time. There was an investment in an infrastructure. There was a conversation about the control of women's bodies that I knew viscerally to be inaccurate, untrue. It ignited something in me that really fueled my life and my activism up until this moment, this day, this conversation. And, while I had been kind of fighting for reproductive freedom and fighting politically and talking about it, working in Planned Parenthoods in different states, what oriented me was a friend of mine had read The Chalice and the Blade, and she recommended it to me. And what I really appreciated was the orientation of the why, the social structure of domination that gave me some calm around that this wasn't necessarily an individual, personal, person-to-person situation. This was a systemic problem, and that it had to do with the cultural implications of how people were growing up, the access that they had to early childhood education, the types of families that they were raised in. And it really allowed me to kind of reduce the amount of frustration and anger I was feeling, to have a little bit of compassion for the system we were dealing with. And so I am so grateful for that. And then, I think it was 2007, I discovered that Riane was teaching a class on transformative leadership. And so I signed up for it. She was going to be doing a graduate level class at the California Institute for Integral Studies, and I signed up. And so it was a real honor to be able to actually study with her, where we really worked through her model. And so a couple of the projects that I worked on with Riane initially was I was working for the city and county of San Francisco. And so I took her domination and partnership model and did an analysis of how the city of San Francisco could become a more partnership-oriented city. That was a really fun project to do, because you can look at where you can create investments in early childhood development, in caregiving, in making the environment a little more thriving and safe, where people can have an opportunity to thrive and feel like they're held with respect and care in the city through using the levers of city government. And I'm really proud to say that work had impact. In 2015, the National Institute for Reproductive Health named San Francisco the #1 city in the country as a place for reproductive freedom. So that was really great. And then, Riane came out with her Caring Economy book, and it really oriented all of us, I think, toward how our economic models are really destroying the environment and the way that we look at our resources. And at the time, I was studying at Harvard for a graduate degree, and my economics classes suddenly had a new sheen on them where these professors were teaching the economic model as if it was true, like scarce resources, extraction, consumption, the growth of the GDP. And the way that Riane's economic model was oriented was taking into account environmental resources, human investment in human capacity through early childhood development, childcare, making sure we're taking care of each other. Like the fact that every human being has a caregiver, has to. And if we're not investing in that, why are caregivers not paid well? And so I realized we have a real problem with how the entire economic system of the world views its resources. And so for me, it was like, okay, so what is a lever of transformation? What should we be doing to transform our world? And I realized that it's elected officials that are making these decisions. Like we went to Congress to try to introduce the social wealth indicators that was based on Riane's Caring Economy initiative. Like, what are we measuring? The thing that struck me about that was like the best thing in the world for the GDP, to grow the GDP, is a gigantic oil spill. That is what really helps the GDP grow. Meanwhile, you've destroyed an entire ecosystem. So the social wealth indicators would definitely be measuring other things like caregiving and the environment and the resources in the environment having value before they are extracted. And we couldn't get any traction for that legislation. And so I was, a light bulb went off. Is like, okay, we need to change the laws. And if we're going to change the laws, we got to change the lawmakers. And that's when I went on a really focused journey to try to get different people elected to office. And so that is where Vote Pro-Choice started. I continue to do the electoral work. As you read in my biography, I continue to support Vote Pro-Choice. I'm currently working directly with a mayor, Mayor London Breed in San Francisco, who is running in a very difficult reelection. And this mayor is so committed to the community. She is a Black woman who grew up in public housing, who cares deeply about reproductive freedom and is committed to getting resources to communities, has developed the biggest caregiving program in the history of the city, if not the history of any urban environment. And her view is a partnership-oriented view.
And so let's start digging a little deeper into Vote Pro-Choice, the organization, its mission, and how you accomplish it.
So changing the laws by changing the lawmakers was the light bulb that went off for me in grad school, which is like, we can be analyzing all of these systems, but at the end of the day, it's elected officials who are making the choices. It's elected officials who are nominating the International Monetary Fund representatives. It's at the presidential level, but all the way down the ballot. We're talking like 525,000 elected offices in this country, not including the political party positions. And we don't invest in many of them at all on the side of partnership. What can we do to get support down the ballot? And that's what Vote Pro-Choice was all about. It was a national voter guide program, now the largest voter guide program in the country, where we were helping people see through the lens of reproductive freedom who all of their elected officials were on their ballot and who would be the best choice. And really giving people the tools that they need to make choices through their values-based. And we realized we needed to be directly helping candidates because no one else was doing that. And we found that, the candidates that really understood a complex, well-being oriented, partnership oriented policy frame are often down ballot women of color because the system impacts them the most, and also transgender candidates. The system of oppression and domination impacts them the most. So candidates that are willing to step up and say, I will lead, have a much better understanding of the allocation of the budget, policy options through the lens of partnership than most privileged older white male rich men will have. That's just life experience. Again, most of Congress are very wealthy people. Most of Congress is men. Most elected officials are men. And therefore, these policies have been made through that lens. So by electing down ballot candidates through the lens of partnership, often down ballot women of color, Black women, transgender candidates, you support people through their life cycle, their early leadership pipeline to eventually become, in my case, having worked in San Francisco politics, Vice President of the United States of America, which is Kamala Harris. So vote pro-choice is really, the concept is to find all the Kamalas in the world, who are going to be able to start their careers going up against, the way she started was going up against a white male incumbent district attorney. And it was a long shot race, but we all believed in her vision. And so we got involved and we got her elected against all odds. And so Vote Pro-Choice has been doing that since 2015 all across the country.
In speaking about the issue of reproductive justice, I think some people just think it's access to contraception or the ability for a person to make their own choice around a pregnancy. I feel like it's more than that. Can you speak more about what the issue, what reproductive justice issues really encompass?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. Okay. This again is Riane's thinking of how do you analyze the system? What happened? Why did we lose Roe v. Wade in a country that is a majority doesn't want Roe v. Wade to go away? I do want to explain some terminology. I think it's important. So we have the words reproductive rights, we have the words reproductive health, we have the words reproductive justice, we have the word reproductive freedom, and they all mean different things. And they all impact different people in different ways. So that's really key, because when we're saying reproductive rights, we're talking about the laws. We're talking about the infrastructure of the anti-choice minority, which I'll talk about in a minute, of passing thousands of pieces of legislation, unconstitutional pieces of legislation, to chip away at abortion rights. And it's the lawsuits at the Supreme Court, and it's the strategy to try to reduce our access over decades. That's the rights, reproductive rights. Then there's reproductive health, which is the care, the clinics, the actual doctors, the nurse practitioners, the regulations that actually support our well-being and care in that regard, the investment in access to birth control. When we're talking about reproductive health, that's what we're talking about. And I want to make the case here, this is not a women's issue, just a women's issue, not just a women's issue. This is an everyone issue, because there's absolutely everyone needs access to reproductive healthcare services, respectful, comprehensive reproductive healthcare services. We're talking, as a woman, we're talking about our well-being, our reproductive well-being, our annual exams, our access to birth control, our breast cancer screenings, uterus screenings, cervical cancer screenings. We're talking about if we decide to get pregnant, is our pregnancy healthy? Do we have access to prenatal care? Do we have access to good postnatal care? If we choose to have an abortion or we need an abortion in the event our pregnancies don't go well, we have that decision. We can be working with our healthcare provider. Who is involved with that? It's not just the woman. It is our communities. It is our families. 2/3 of the people who choose to have abortions also are already mothers. So we're talking about the kids in the family, our partners, it's our everybody. So also, I just want to name that people who identify as male also need access to comprehensive reproductive health care services, STD screening. There's going to be a new male birth control pill or a birth control shot or something. Men also can't have a role to play in nurturing children, which is Riane's systemic perspective. It's not just women's work. We're talking about healthy families, which leads to the frame of reproductive justice. Now, I love the frame of reproductive justice, but we need to name what that is. In the 90s, there was a group of Black women academics, a collective of Black women academics that were getting ready to go to the UN Conference for Women. And they were looking at all of these white women who were head of the reproductive rights and health community, who were talking about abortion and birth control, abortion and birth control. These Black academic women were saying, like, hey, ladies, we're not looking at this in a holistic way. We have to think about reproductive justice as all the things encompassing the health of our families. So reproductive justice not only includes healthcare, it includes our environmental justice, it includes access to clean water and education and food and living wage, a living minimum wage. We're talking about a comprehensive well-being frame. And that's why I love it so much, because it's so aligned with Riane's work. And so these Black women academics have been they're gathered now in a collective called Sister Song out of Georgia. Highly recommend that folks get to know the frame, because it's just so healthy and it's so partnership oriented. And it takes the conversation out of white women saying abortion and birth control all the time to how can we look at our communities holistically? And then, I choose to use the word reproductive freedom because it's a values-based concept. We know from Riane's work that this is about domination and control, and it is. There is a frame, like we saw in the Republican National Convention last night, and the Project 2025 900-page policy manifesto that I hope all the listeners have already looked at. It's a domination-based policy. It is women need to be taking care of children, having babies at home, not working. It says it, it says it very explicitly, that the man is the head of the household, exactly domination mentality. And so we have to be thinking about alternative frames and electing people who understand that alternative frame. And what's great is that having been mentored and having been colleagues with Kamala Harris, I know she understands the reproductive justice frame, because she would always say, oh, you want to talk about women's issues? I'd love to talk about the economy. And she would pivot and talk about holistic well-being and the allocation of resources. And that's what we're talking about here.
You are listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We hope you are enjoying today's episode and you will consider joining our family of sponsors. Or you can help us attract sponsors by downloading, following, or subscribing to the series, and liking and rating each episode you view on YouTube. We also would love to hear from you, including if you have a partnership story that you would like to share. Reach out to us at center@partnershipway.org. And now, back to today's episode.
So, I want to go back to the concept that 80% of the country does not want their elected officials making decisions about their pregnancies and their bodies and their healthcare decisions. So why did we get here? And I just want to roll back to the 80s, where Ronald Reagan, who was governor of California, a pro-choice governor who signed into legislation some expansion of abortion access and expansion of birth control. And don't forget, Richard Nixon was in charge of Title X, allocated a bunch of money to birth control for socioeconomically impacted people. These are like pro-choice Republican men. Ronald Reagan realized he could not get elected without the evangelical anti-choice minority. And we're talking like 18% of the electorate. So it was a strategy, an invested strategy in the 80s that we saw manifested over time of investment in this mobilizing this anti-choice minority, extremely religious, anti-choice people that were in dominator-oriented churches that said, God first, man second, women having babies, who are truly anti-choice, who truly subscribe to this dominator model. But the Republican Party could not get elected. They could not elect their leaders without mobilizing this group of people. And so therefore, an outside investment of infrastructure had to be in place, which was started in the 80s, doubled down in the 90s, that included things like the Federalist Society that was in every law school, that started to kind of support and mentor law students to be very conservative, that would eventually be the place where Republican presidents would pick their Supreme Court justices and federal judges. So they're extremely conservative. A lot of investment in state legislatures, and so many good tools for state legislatures, anti-choice conservative state legislatures, to be able to pass legislation to chip away at abortion rights that would continue to mobilize their voters. So this, and as well as protest infrastructure. I don't know if many of your listeners have probably been to women's marches or protest marches where they've seen like the same kind of awful signs that are all propaganda about abortion. And it's only a few people, but it's like their stuff is big and really gory and really scary. And this is all, it's a same across the entire country. And so therefore, we see this overly funded, what I call it, the overly funded anti-choice minority over the past 20 years, really did mobilize in the local and state offices. And I will say the pro-choice group didn't do any answering to this at all, which we can start to see the dominator culture of the Democratic Party, which was, oh, that's a women's issue. We're going to put it over here. We're going to call it a women's issue. We're not going to say the word abortion, and we're going to just keep it over here with these pink-colored women, like with their pink logos. And I'm saying the Democratic Party actually abdicated the entire conversation to these organizations. They did a great job, like Planned Parenthood and NARAL, now Reproductive Freedom for All, the Feminist Majority. They did a great job with their resources, mobilizing their people. That was what they had to do with limited resources. But it left this entire group of humans, men, people, the Catholics that believe in abortion, people that didn't want their elected officials involved in making their decisions. It left all that conversation on the table. So you've got a minority of people on one side that are being mobilized to elect anti-choice leaders, and you've got another side that is abdicating the conversation to a woman's issue and not owning it as actually an integrative, healthy, well-being, partnership-oriented policy, to have freedom to make your own decisions, to take care of the children that you have, to decide what your family should look like. And it's where we're at now.
So what do you think, Heidi, are the most important next steps for all of us to take in our work to regain and strengthen reproductive freedom for all Americans?
Well, it's all, in my opinion, and again, with Riane's guidance and mentorship and frame, I'm always looking for those foundational solutions. And it's change the laws by changing the lawmakers. So let's get in there and vote. This is real. It's real, and it requires political action now, because we didn't answer 30 years of this overly funded anti-choice minority, but we can fix it now. It's going to be, I think it'll take about 10 years for it to get better. There's going to be a lot of suffering, a ton of suffering. It's already happening, but it is so absurd and goes totally against our feeling of being independent human entities in the United States of America, with all its complexity, that now we realize that's impacting us directly, and we're going to fight against it. So it is a political strategy now. It really is. So electing candidates who support the value of reproductive freedom and give to your city council members who are going to pass like state or city-oriented Grace Act laws that are going to protect your city and wherever you are from anti-choice pressure coming from like whatever happens at the national election. So, focus on state legislatures, get to know your state representatives. These are people that are elected by like very low numbers of votes, and they're very accessible to you. They're in your community. So go to your state capital, knock on the door, and be like, I want to talk to you about what I think, because they will actually engage with you. They really will. That's what's very important. So it's like a tiny, tiny little bit of research. Now, of course, we've done that all for you at Vote Pro Choice. So you can figure out who your elected officials are or who's on the ballot, and we'll tell you like who's good and who's not good. But call them up, write a note, that is absolutely important. And it's worth every single bit of energy right now.
Beautiful.
To let our elected officials know that we are watching, we're engaged, and they better be voting for our freedom. But like engaging at that level will transform everything. And also, side note, if you feel like it, run for office. It's not like at the state and local level, not that hard. You can get elected to your state legislature with like, in some states for like a $2,500 budget and, a couple thousand votes. So we'll help you.
So let me just make sure I got that. Folks who are interested in running for a local seat of any type, they can come to Vote Pro Choice and get guidance on how to start that journey?
Vote Pro Choice is it's more oriented toward if you've already decided to run. So if you've decided to run, we'll help you in that process. But I do recommend, now this is for women, it's Emerge. Emerge America focuses on Democratic women. It's a very powerful training program. I think they're in 23 states now. So probably in a state close to you. They also have online training and an incredible network that will be, maybe I want to run someday. And it starts from there. So really, really great. Also, Vote, Run, Lead, an excellent national platform that is focused on state and local offices, will train you wherever you are. And they have an incredible resources. And of course, Emily's List also has a local and state network, but they also are similar to Vote Pro Choice, as they'll help you after you've decided you already want to run. So those are great. They're all for women. We love our pro-choice boys, and we love men who understand the partnership model. So Vote Pro Choice does support men for sure. And some of our resources, we can help refer you to places like Men for Choice and the National Democratic Training Committee that has a lot of resources for non-male identifying candidates. Vote Pro Choice also has a very strong transgender candidate program. So we can also help direct you to resources if you identify as non-binary, transgender. There's not enough for the state and local down ballot work, but we can do what we can. I also will put a shout out to our colleagues at Run for Something, which is focused on young people. They have a great infrastructure for running for office as well. So again, Vote Pro Choice is going to give you comprehensive voter support and really help you do values-based voting. Those resources are there for you in the form of the National Voter Guide. So when it's time for you to go to the polls, I'm starting early voting in September. So I assume when this podcast comes out, you're all going to be early voting already. We'll have resources up until Election Day. So you can get your National Voter Guide by going to voteprochoice.us.
Great. So Heidi, I'm not familiar with that term, Grace Act laws. Can you give some examples of what Grace Act?
Oh, yeah. Yes. So some bold local elected pro-choice champions in Texas, South Carolina, Idaho, I think, developed something called the Grace Act, and it's a city council-based legislation. And I think San Antonio did a ballot initiative for this too, which actually creates a little bubble over your city and says, okay, fine, state legislature, we're with an abortion ban. So we are going to create a policy frame around our city that says we don't believe in the abortion ban, and we are going to divert all resources away from any kind of criminal investigation or charging of anyone seeking abortion care. So it makes sure that the police departments are not funded for investigation of miscarriages. It is no incarceration money goes into like sheriffs and jails to be able to incarcerate anyone for any kind of pregnancy-related just decisions. It deviates budget from district attorney's offices from charging, and also it creates like abortion fund access. So some city money can go into helping folks travel if necessary. So it's kind of a stopgap for doing what you can where you are. Of course, states are suing cities that are doing this, but it's worth it. We have to put up the walls. And that's what we're doing in San Francisco. We're doing a charter amendment, a ballot initiative to really make sure that we are clear that we have infrastructure in place, that even if there's a national abortion ban, even if the Project 2025 policies are implemented, which include things like banning birth control, reigniting the Comstock Act, which does ban birth control, a national abortion ban, a pregnancy tracking database, which is the creepiest of all, that we are not sharing data. We will not be investigating any of it. We will not be allowing anybody to come get anyone inside of San Francisco city limits to who wants to exercise their reproductive freedom. We also did a really cool thing, which we rezoned the entire city to allow for healthcare clinics and abortion access. So across the country in different cities, there's been situations like in Framingham, Massachusetts, they used water ordinances to prevent a healthcare clinic, an abortion clinic, from being built using water ordinances. And these elected commissioners were anti-choice commissioners. And so it's like just making sure that the zoning laws are also allowing for distribution of birth control and health care and abortion services if like a Planned Parenthood or independent clinic has to expand. That's really important. I would refer anyone who's interested in these policy frames to go to the National Institute for Reproductive Health local Repro Index. It's all partnership based. It's like Riane's stuff, Riane's frame operationalized, where it looks at it's exactly the work that we did together to what we did with San Francisco. All of the policies that need to be in place to make a city a thriving place to support reproductive justice and reproductive freedom. And it's a great list of things that your city council can do, your county government can do, and to some extent your state legislatures.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I know, Heidi, that you've worked closely with Kamala Harris. Can you share more about Vice President Harris's, how her work reflects partnerism?
I'm so glad you asked that. Kamala, our vice president, is definitely a partnership leader, no doubt about it. I started working with her in 2004 when she was running for district attorney. It was an impossible race, and all the women got involved. And she was always looking for community well-being opportunities and policies in her role as a prosecutor. And it was so innovative. Like, hey, there's recidivism issue. What do we need to be doing? We need to get these kids jobs. Like we need to get these kids in school. It was all a partnership-oriented frame. She really was focused on the well-being of people. She was like, why she decided to go into her job in a district attorney's office as a prosecutor. Her family, which I hope you all know her story, she's the daughter of immigrants, a scientist from India and an economist from Jamaica, brilliant academic people who she was raised in Oakland with a single mother and her sister. And her mother was a cancer researcher and a scientist. So constantly looking at her lived experience was like a partnership idea of like a strong mother scientist constantly looking for solutions to society's problems. And she focused her daughters into service. And her sister went to go run the ACLU And Kamala became a prosecutor, which was an issue with the family, but she realized that she wanted to be inside the system making decisions about care. And I will say her impact on me was profound because I saw that. I was like, okay, this is a woman of color, a Black and East Asian woman of color who was raised by a strong mother, not in a dominator culture, grew up in Oakland, California, knew the allocation of resources was not right, knew that the carceral network was like not serving people. So she went in where she could make decisions that were different. And as district attorney, she did that and reduced recidivism, brought in services, developed apprenticeship programs, like incredibly brilliant frame. And it was very innovative at the time. If you think about it, she was 35 years old. It was 2004. There was nobody that looked like her in district attorney's offices anywhere. And then she really opened the door for that perspective. Her book, Smart on Crime, is a partnership book, for sure. But then she became attorney general and then senator. And then, oh my gosh, she's the vice president of the United States. And our number one advocate around reproductive freedom. And she's talking about reproductive freedom and justice exactly like all of this through a partnership lens.
So I do want to let our listeners know that I will be including links to all of the resources that we've talked about today in the show notes for the episode, along with, of course, the link to the Center for Partnership Systems, where you can always access resources related to Riane Eisler's domination-partnership continuum, and where you can also join the Center for Partnership Systems email list to stay up to date on our current events. Heidi, I wonder if you have some closing words that you would like to share with our listeners and viewers.
I appreciate all of Riane's frames. They're very important for us to understand where we live, how we live, and the choices that we're making, no matter where you are in the world. There is a better way. And I really appreciate her giving us a future that we can look into, that we can see into. One that's around healthy allocation of resources, reverence for our planet, for all the despair we might feel around climate change and politics and our own personal interaction with the systems of power. What the domination and partnership model says is that we can create significant change by doing what we can where we are in our communities. And I do think that local engagement is what will change everything. You don't have to embrace every single nuance of everything and like fix it all at one time, but understanding that our power comes from our ability to make free choices, our ability to orient ourselves in dominator cultures or situations, and to choose to go for well-being or choose to go for more allocation, to share our resources, to take little steps that will be helpful in our own like recycling and climate work. Like do that. Every little bit helps. Now again, I'm going to make a plug. Or at this time, we have to be very involved in the practice of democracy. It's ugly business. It's like really ugly business right now. But we must not let it keep us down. We can't. We have to realize like a dominator culture is at play. Power is being reallocated. It's not going to go down without a fight, but we must engage. We cannot be disempowered by this. So that is what I hope that people will take away from this, and that we can be all grateful for the orienting nature of Riane's systems.
Thank you so much again, Heidi, for joining us today. It's been really a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We're grateful to Rising Appalachia for the use of resilience as our Power of Partnership theme music. If you would like us to feature your partnership story, or if you would like to be a proud sponsor of the Power of Partnership podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will leave us a review on your favorite podcast channel. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released every other Tuesday. I'm Cherry Jacobs Pruitt. See you next time on the Power of Partnership podcast.
I am resilient. I trust the movement. I negate the chaos. Uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to live.